Hi, everyone. Really thrilled to be presenting on this topic to a peer Great Lakes and former Rust Belt city and region. Buffalo and Cleveland have so much in common. I think it's just great to have a conversation about land use and development issues because we face many of the same challenges and opportunities. And Buffalo went through a long process to adopt an entirely new zoning ordinance. That's going to be the subject of today's conversation. And while you folks over in Cuyahoga County are focused on implementing TOD into your code, the Green Code is actually a comprehensive rewrite. We threw out all of our development regulations and started from scratch. So I'm going to put some of this project in context. It was ultimately adopted in 2017 after a 7-year-long intense process in engagement with the public. But when we talk about our new zoning ordinance, it's not a TOD components that are incorporated. The entire code is TOD and walkability oriented from municipal border to municipal border. So we'll start with some context. The whole project was unveiled on Earth Day in 2010. Mayor Byron Brown, standing in what would soon become Larkin Square, the center of a revived walkable mixed-use neighborhood called the Hydraulics or Larkinville, unveiled this project to rewrite our massively overlaid and complex 1953 zoning ordinance entirely. We called it the Green Code with the notion that by tapping into our traditional walkable development pattern, building on our transit-served neighborhoods, that we would ultimately be able to help build a better planet through development, smart development at the local scale, thinking globally, acting locally. There are a couple components to the Green Code. Number one, of course, is our comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2006, won the Charter Award from the Congress for the New Urbanism in 2009. In our zoning rewrite, we adopted a citywide land use plan that brought the high-level principles of the comprehensive plan down to a more specific and granular level, which gave us the information we needed to ultimately adopt the Green Code, as is informally known, or the Unified Development Ordinance, which is the ordinance we adopted in 2017. So the comprehensive plan set out high-level principles for redeveloping our city. It was adopted 2006. Smart growth and sustainability are its core principles, building on our assets, investing strategically, and embracing smart growth and sustainability. And before I even started at City Hall, I've been working here since 2009. But as a community activist with a friend of mine, Chuck Bannis, we pointed consistently to a line in the comprehensive plan which called for a companion zoning ordinance to make the smart growth and sustainability principles of the plan enforceable. Without a new code, we determined that the smart growth and sustainability principles would simply be words and could not be enacted, particularly with the zoning ordinance we had on the books at the time. So that whole process kicked off in 2010. We actually had 244 public meetings over a 7-year time period. I kind of joke it was the 7-year-long, 2-year project. Many of those meetings were simply small meetings with block clubs in living rooms. Others were considerably larger, like this 400-person meeting on the west side in Lafayette High School. But this was the most civic engagement we've ever been able to incorporate into any planning project in the city's history. And we wanted to do that because it was a complete rewrite. We were completely rewriting the development DNA of Buffalo, and that required engagement across the entire city. So like most cities across the country, we had a unwieldy conventional zoning ordinance composed principally of legalese, heavily focused on kind of 1950s planning principles. And we wanted to move toward one of the country's first citywide form-based codes, written in plain English, supplemented with helpful tables and diagrams and illustrations, making it easy for not just land use attorneys and architects to understand what's allowed, but also regular neighborhood residents to understand what they can do on their property and what they could expect next door. And just to put this in the planning context, a form-based code is not as dissimilar from a conventional code as people think. It uses many of the same land use and regulatory tools, but the kind of philosophy behind how those tools are used is different. A conventional zoning code focuses on separating uses, limiting density, and providing lots of off-street parking. That is the conventional approach has been used in America for decades, and we're shifting toward a more 21st century model. Within the industry, they're called form-based codes. I simply call it 21st century zoning But the focus now is on creating walkable mixed-use neighborhoods. And we do so by focusing on design, which is the key factor that makes it possible for a wide variety of uses to exist in closer proximity without significant conflict. The Green Code attempted to build on Buffalo's planning legacy. This will feel very familiar to Cleveland residents. Buffalo actually has one of the few radial street plans in the country. Washington, D.C., Madison, Wisconsin, Detroit have a radial street plan. This was built in 1804 under surveyor Joseph Ellicott, over which was overlaid the Frederick Law Olmsted Park and Parkway system. It was the first system of parks and parkways ever conceived in the US after 1870, when Frederick Law Olmsted was fresh off the job in New York, building Central Park and Prospect Park. That gave us, those two systems gave us some of our best public spaces. This is Niagara Square, shortly after the construction of the McKinley Monument. And of course, our parks and parkways. This is looking down Gates Circle and Chapin Parkway. There are also lesser known plans in Buffalo, which folks in Cleveland will feel very relatable. One of which was the Plan of Buffalo of 1922 by Edward H. Bennett and William Parsons. This was a Beaux-Arts plan that attempted to conceive of Niagara Square as a government center with a new city hall at the foot of Court Street. That was ultimately built. We have a reputation in Buffalo of letting our plans collect dust on shelves, but if actually looking in the history of the city, we actually have a tremendous history of implementing our plans. We obviously went from neoclassical, as conceived in the 22 plan, to a spectacular Art Deco building, which is now our city hall where I'm sitting today. That also gave us the outline for our very first zoning ordinance in 1925. It's a simple 9-page document, which at the time appreciated the walkable mixed-use character of Buffalo and simply focused on separating the truly incompatible uses like industrial and residential and incorporating some of our first height standards. And it another great legacy of Buffalo, of course, is the neighborhoods we inherited, the traditional development pattern. Every neighborhood in Buffalo was essentially built before 1950. They were all built to be walkable and transit served. So that's a tremendous urban design legacy that we've inherited and are attempting to restore as investment floods into the city and our new regulations are in place. We also wanted the project to respond to our planning mistakes, one of which we feel very strongly was the 1953 zoning ordinance itself. It attempted to impose a suburban car-oriented model on our walkable mixed-use neighborhoods. A lot of the same ideas that were built around our zoning code also informed the plans for urban renewal. This is Mayor Sedita with architects and downtown developers looking down at the core of our shopping district, which was demolished in 1965. That's the Erie County Savings Bank in the rear being demolished. The Ellicott District redevelopment project was actually Buffalo's first urban renewal project. It was Buffalo's most diverse and dense neighborhood, which was completely destroyed after 1959. Everything except for 3 schools and 2 churches and some 1950s public housing was wiped off the face of the earth, along with most of the streets. Same thing happened behind City Hall, where the Italian colony in the Lower West Side was also similarly demolished. Even a school that was only 25 years old was flattened. Of course, and we ripped out our public transit system. So this is the last streetcar riding down Broadway in my neighborhood on Buffalo's east side in 1950. We destroyed Frederick Law Olmsted's Humboldt Parkway to erect the Kensington Expressway. These are all very similar problems that Great Lakes and other cities across America have experienced. And of course, our highway network not only caused direct damage where they traveled, but also helped export our population and our economy to the suburbs. So why start from scratch? Oops. Well, for one thing, we hadn't ever rewritten our zoning code since 1953, the year that Elvis Presley recorded his first song in Sun Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. And we hadn't undertaken a citywide land use planning exercise since 1977 when Saturday Night Fever hit the silver screen. And the code had ballooned to a mammoth 1,804 pages, making it very difficult to understand and apply. It's poorly organized and written, made it exceedingly difficult to invest, and most importantly, restricted walkable mixed-use development. And that was really the main thrust behind the reform effort that we undertook in the aughts. Walkable mixed-use neighborhoods is the core principle behind the Green Code. And by the way, when I say walkable development and TOD are the same thing. If you have a walkable neighborhood, you have a transit-oriented neighborhood. You have a transit-oriented neighborhood, you have a walkable neighborhood. But under our previous code, which was based on suburban design principles, sprawl in the heart of the city was legally required, and traditional neighborhood development was very difficult to undertake. So the whole idea was that you couldn't turn a typewriter into an iPhone. We wanted to start from scratch, throw out all of our zoning regulations, very few of which made any sense for Buffalo in the 21st century, and adopt a new form-based mixed-use zoning code. So the code today, you can download it, by the way. Just look up Buffalo Green Code or Buffalo Unified Development Ordinance. It's now a simple 334 pages, clear and often illustrated. It's designed so that neighbors can understand what each zone means, not just in terms of the text, but each zone, for instance, all 26 zones in the code have illustrations that depict, under healthy market conditions, the type of urbanism that would result from the standards. So, and as a form-based code, it leaves a lot of the design standards with a tremendous amount of specificity and provides a little bit more flexibility with regard to use. But this is an example, the N3C mixed-use center zone, which applies to many of our neighborhood main streets, showing how those standards apply. And unlike conventional zoning ordinances, it also focuses on the many different building types that walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods typically have, and specifically tailors the standards to those types of buildings that are often in close proximity to each other. Building on many of the traditional development characteristics that we went out into each neighborhood and measured: setbacks, lot occupancies, story heights, the percentage of fenestration on the ground floor. I think one of the reasons that this code was tremendous strength for Buffalo is that it was uniquely tailored, like a finely tailored suit to Buffalo's traditional development character. We downloaded all of the development features of Buffalo's neighborhoods into an ordinance that reflected the existing and desired development characteristics of the city, and organized them into form standards, which you can understand from a simple, for each zone, 2-page spread within the code that took you from empty parcel to fully articulated building to understand how the standards are applied. It's often thought that form-based codes don't address use. That's untrue. Of course it does. But one of the great innovations of the code is that rather than sifting through 1,804 pages to determine what uses are allowed where, a simple 2-page chart lists what uses are allowed in each zone, with moons, half moons, and empty boxes indicating whether a use is allowed, requires a special use permit, or is prohibited. Kind of set up like consumer reports. And one of the great innovations that we adopt in the code, actually is one of my favorite section of the code, is section 6.1.1.f. And one of the really, I think for 1950s style planners, that was really baffling about the existing urbanism in Buffalo is that not all mixed use commercial development was organized along neighborhood main streets and the streetcar routes or in downtown. And we have a tradition that we inherited from previous generations of corner shops and taverns, sometimes existing mid-block in residential context. This is just one example, not what is now Typico Coffee House on a residential street in Lower West Side. So we legalized corner shops and taverns regardless of zone, as long as that the applicant could demonstrate that the ground floor is used for a commercial space at some point before 1953. There are hundreds of such buildings like this throughout Buffalo that have now effectively become legalized. We also introduced an innovation called an adaptive reuse permit, which applies to larger buildings that are listed or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. I know Cleveland has, like Buffalo, a large number of school buildings, religious structures, often in residential contexts, that often require a lot more use flexibility in order to be effectively reused and economically reused. We address, of course, site development beyond the use and the building itself, allowing for the Buffalo garden style, just much more exuberant and naturalistic, not the finely cut lawns of the suburbs. We introduced the first standards for tree conservation. This is enormously important for walkability and transit orientation. Incorporating nature into our cities is tremendously important in encouraging people to walk and take transit and bike and the like. And incorporated the first ever citywide green stormwater management standards, as well as dark sky standards for outdoor lighting, as well as the first ever comprehensive shoreline buffers for our waterfronts, as well as buffer yards for incompatible uses. And I think the thing that's actually gotten the most attention for the Green Code has been our market-based approach to parking. Buffalo is the very first city in the United States to completely abolish all minimum parking requirements. Many cities have done so in particular areas like historic districts or in their downtowns or along key corridors, along transit routes. But Buffalo went bold and big and eliminated all minimum parking requirements. So if you want to build parking, we'll tell you how to landscape, light, and screen it. But if you don't want to build parking, it's none of our business. We incorporated common sense standards on signs, signs oriented to walkable neighborhoods rather than signs oriented to speeding cars, or incorporated comprehensive standards based on neighborhood input. And as a form-based code, we not only address the private realm, but also the public realm. We've long had a policy to do complete streets. Buffalo is actually the first city in New York State to adopt the Complete Streets Ordinance in 2005. And with the Green Code, we adopted a policy on how to do complete streets. This is enormously important to walkability and transit orientation. Without the right public infrastructure, it can hamper, of course, the effectiveness of TOD strategies. We basically downloaded all the standards from the ITE and CNU's Walkable Urban Thoroughfares Manual into the zoning ordinance. So whenever streets are newly constructed, reconstructed, or restriped, the complete streets policies are being applied objectively. And of course, adopting an entirely new code, there's a big question, what do you do about non-conforming uses, structures, and signs? We comprehensively address that as well. But one of the really big advantages of adopting this kind of comprehensive approach based on objective, easy to understand standards is that it made it much more attractive to invest and open a business. And we have a code now that's written in plain English. Not even the word shall exists in the entire document because the word must means the same thing, and it's much more approachable to people using it who are average citizens. And of course, it's full of ample tables, diagrams, and illustrations to help illuminate the intent and applicability of the standards. And for the first time ever, we incorporated a comprehensive approval timelines for all development projects and approval types. So a project that meets the objective standards in the code is guaranteed to be approved in either 30 or 62 days, depending on the scale. So we've now been well practiced at applying this kind of walkable, transit-served approach to physical development. As I noted, of course, we adopted the code in 2017. We've had 6 years of experience in applying the code in a city which is now growing again for the first time since the 1950s. So Buffalo is actually growing faster than any other of our true Rust Belt brothers and sisters along the Great Lakes. We had a 6.5% increase in population in the last census. We grew by 17,500 people, most of them immigrants and refugees. But neighborhoods are beginning to revive throughout the city. And these are just a couple of my favorite project examples which illustrate how this new code approach has helped facilitate investment and physical development. And I think the most profound effect that removing minimum parking requirements has had and liberalizing our use standards, incorporating effective design standards, has been on actually the ability of small businesses to open. This is an example. It's Foible's Coffee and Pie on Rhode Island Street. This is in a residential zone. This building had a vacant ground story since the 1950s and was opened as a 600 square foot pie shop with, then the owner lives above, kind of tapping into an 1890s lifestyle and living above the store. And this is now just one of dozens of examples throughout the city of formerly commercial buildings and residential contexts that have been transformed with small businesses. I'm actually one of the people who've done so that myself. This is actually my bar on the east side. I live upstairs as well. And I think planning by doing is a new mantra among city planners. So employing the new standards in the Green Code, I bought a long vacant corner tavern in a residential context where under the previous code, I would have been required to install 11 parking spaces, probably needed to demolish the 2 buildings next door to do so. But the new code made it so easy to do that we reopened this long shuttered, long closed, 30 years closed corner tavern built in 1914 as a nonprofit social hall. And 940 square feet, 2 apartments above, no parking required, no parking, no problem. And that's now reopened as well. Because we tailored all the form standards to the historic development pattern that existed throughout our city, it's now incredibly easy to build an infill house. In fact, singles and doubles, as long as they meet the standards in the ordinance, don't even require a public hearing. You just go out there and build it. And this is 15 Allen Street, one of my favorite projects. This is actually the very first zero parking new construction project that was enabled by the code. It was approved in 2017, has since been completed. 12 units above with 2 shop fronts in the ground story, a half block from a metro rail station on Allen Street in a historic district. This is another perhaps more typical example of new construction we're starting to see throughout the city. This is on Elmwood Avenue, and this provides some parking. So about 0.75 spaces per residential unit, no parking for the commercial units, but a very typical example of the kind of code of the kind of development that the code has helped enable. And I think, by the way, there's this impression that if you eliminate minimum parking requirements, the developers will no longer provide parking. Most developers do, but the advantage is that it gives developers and the community flexibility to provide the amount of parking that makes sense for a particular location and a particular type of development. And when you have one size fits all standards that apply equally across your entire city, it makes it very, very difficult to have that kind of flexibility to do the infill development that can help repair our neighborhoods. This is another example, 201 Ellicott Street. This is a workforce housing development in the heart of our downtown. 201 units of housing with 0 off-street parking. It's just assumed and has correctly projected that the occupants would mostly be younger professionals and looking for more affordable downtown units and often rely on walking, biking, and taking transit more than the typical population. We also have large examples of historic preservation projects that under typical zoning standards would be very difficult to reuse. This is a great example, the Richardson Olmsted campus, which was historically the New York State Asylum for the Insane, designed by Henry Hobson Richardson with the grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. This was vacant for some 25 years and has been revived as a hotel. A few hundred apartments are being built in the complex over the next couple of years. And the grounds have been fully restored as a park that the public is welcome to enjoy. And with minimum parking requirements and the kind of use restrictions that we had in our old code, this project would have been very difficult to do. So what does the new code do for Buffalo? Well, we talked to residents all across the city, had fantastic conversations about what kind of neighborhoods we want to see developed. We ultimately arrived at a consensus vision that is an effective instruction manual for building out the communities that people want to see. And we're very proud to say that the new code was adopted unanimously by our Common Council without a single lawsuit having been filed. And it's now enjoying, I think, a great degree of success since it has been adopted. This is an image from the adoption ceremony back at Larkin Square, bringing us back full circle in the now fast reviving Larkinville with projects greatly enabled by the new code. So again, my name is Chris Hawley. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you ever have any questions about how we were able to undertake this and the kind of principles we employed and the effectiveness we've enjoyed, as well as the problems we've had. I could deliver an entire presentation about the small problems we've encountered since the whole code was adopted. But thank you very much. I'm here for questions.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to end the recording.